Before a single tear falls, before your voice breaks, before you even realize what you're feeling, something is already happening. Somewhere nearby, an animal has picked up on it. Ears shift, a head lifts. Eyes lock onto your face with an intensity that seems almost impossible for a creature without language. For most dog owners, this feels like nothing more than a familiar warmth, a private understanding between two very different species. But scientists studying the canine mind have spent the last 2 decades asking a far stranger question. Is your dog actually reading your emotions? Or is something else, something almost unsettling, going on inside that skull the size of a fist? Because here's the paradox. Dogs cannot understand a single word of what we say. They have no concept of sarcasm, of context, of the complicated stories we tell ourselves about our own feelings. And yet, again and again, in laboratories across Europe, Japan, and the United States, dogs have shown an ability to detect human emotional states that some researchers describe, cautiously, as unprecedented in the animal kingdom. Not instinct, not simple obedience, something closer to genuine perception. But before we can call this empathy, before we can say a dog truly feels what we feel, we have to ask a much older, much harder question. What is actually happening in that moment when a dog looks into a human face? For most of the 20th century, the scientific answer was almost dismissive. Dogs, many researchers argued, were simply excellent readers of body language, the same way a skilled poker player reads a tell. A slumped posture, a held breath, the subtle stiffening of shoulders before anger.
This idea even has a name, borrowed from a famous case of an early 1900s horse in Germany, known as Clever Hans, who appeared to solve math problems, but was, in reality, reading unconscious cues from his trainer's posture. For decades, dogs were assumed to be doing something similar. Clever, but not truly perceptive. Reactive, but not understanding. It was a reasonable theory. It was also, as it turns out, incomplete. In 2016, a research team led by Natalia Alberki at the University of Lincoln designed an experiment that would begin to unravel that assumption. Dogs were shown 2 photographs at once, one human face expressing happiness, another expressing anger, while simultaneously hearing an audio clip of either a happy or an angry voice in either human or dog vocalizations. The dogs consistently spent more time looking at the face that matched the emotional tone of the sound, even when the voice belonged to a species other than their own. That result mattered because it suggested something body language alone could not explain. The dogs weren't just reading a single visual cue. They were combining information across 2 entirely different senses, sight and sound, to recognize the same underlying emotional state. That is not simple pattern matching. That is something closer to genuine cross-sensory emotional recognition. If that idea feels as strange to you as it did to me the first time I read the study, you're going to want to see where this goes, because it only gets stranger from here. If you're the kind of person who can't look at their dog the same way twice, this channel exists for exactly that feeling.
Consider subscribing, because every documentary here goes further into the hidden architecture of animal minds, the science most people never hear about. Now, back to the mystery. Because recognizing an emotion is one thing, what happens next inside a dog's body is where things get genuinely remarkable. In 2015, a Japanese research team led by Miho Nagasawa and Takefumi Kikusui published a study in the journal Science that would reshape how we think about the human-dog bond. They measured oxytocin, the hormone associated with maternal attachment and trust in both dogs and their owners before and after periods of mutual gazing. When a dog looked into its owner's eyes, the owner's oxytocin rose. And remarkably, the dog's oxytocin rose too, creating something the researchers called an oxytocin loop, a biochemical feedback cycle nearly identical to the one observed between human parents and infants. Then came the crucial comparison. The team ran the same experiment with hand-raised wolves, animals that share 99% of their DNA with dogs. The wolves showed almost none of this effect. Whatever is happening in that gaze, it isn't simply ancient canine instinct. It appears to be something that evolved specifically during domestication, something built for us. Domestication seems to have reshaped more than hormones. In 2019, a research team led by Giuliani Kaminsky at the University of Portsmouth examined the facial muscles of dogs and wolves side by side and found a small but striking anatomical difference. Dogs possess a muscle around the inner eyebrow, the levator anguli oculi medialis, that wolves either lack entirely or possess only in a rudimentary form.
This is the muscle responsible for what dog owners affectionately call puppy dog eyes, the subtle raising of the inner brow that makes a dog's expression appear more infant-like, more appealing, more emotionally legible to a human observer. The researchers proposed something extraordinary. This muscle may have been favored generation after generation precisely because humans responded to it, unconsciously selecting for dogs whose faces could better communicate, or perhaps better manipulate, our emotions. If true, this means dogs haven't only evolved to read our feelings, they may have evolved a face specifically built to influence them. But perhaps the most startling discovery came from an entirely different sense altogether. In 2022, Clara Wilson at Queen's University Belfast asked a deceptively simple question. Could dogs detect stress itself, not through sight or sound, but through smell? Human participants were asked to perform a difficult mental arithmetic task, one designed specifically to trigger measurable physiological stress. Before and after, researchers collected samples of their breath and sweat. Dogs trained for the experiment, none of whom had ever met these particular humans, were able to correctly identify the stressed sample over the calm one at a rate far beyond chance, in some cases exceeding 90% accuracy. Stress, it turns out, has a scent. Cortisol and adrenaline subtly alter the chemical composition of human sweat, and a dog's nose, up to 10,000 times more sensitive than ours, appears able to detect that shift almost instantly. Which means, in a very real sense, your dog may be smelling your anxiety before you've even said a word. The evidence kept accumulating from unexpected directions.
Researchers in Sweden, led by Ann-Sophie Sundman at Linköping University, tracked cortisol levels in dogs and their owners over an extended period and found something the team hadn't fully anticipated. The stress hormone levels of dogs and their owners rose and fell together, day after day, almost as if the dogs were absorbing their owner's emotional weather. Around the same time, researchers in Japan studying contagious yawning found that dogs were significantly more likely to yawn after watching their own owner yawn than after watching a stranger, a phenomenon closely linked, in humans, to empathic processing. None of this proves dogs consciously understand what a human is going through, but it does suggest something is happening at a physiological level that goes far beyond simple observation. Here's where the mystery deepens rather than resolves. An Italian research team led by Marcello Siniscalchi discovered that dogs wag their tails asymmetrically depending on their emotional state, favoring the right side of the body when experiencing something positive and the left side when experiencing something they perceive as threatening or negative. This asymmetry mirrors the way the two hemispheres of the canine brain specialize, much like the left and right hemispheres of the human brain handle different emotional processing. Even more strikingly, when dogs were shown video footage of other dogs wagging left instead of right, their heart rates increased and they displayed visible signs of anxiety. In other words, dogs are not only feeling something internally, they may be reading each other's internal states externally through a signal most human eyes can't even consciously detect. So where does that leave us?
Is your dog capable of empathy in the way we understand it? A genuine emotional resonance with your inner state? Or is this something else entirely, an extraordinarily sophisticated set of evolved behaviors, shaped over roughly 15,000 years of living alongside humans, selected precisely because dogs who could anticipate and respond to our emotions survived, were fed, were kept close? Researchers like Clive Wynne at Arizona State University argue for a more cautious interpretation, describing what dogs display as a kind of hypersociability, an instinct to bond, rather than proof of a rich inner emotional life. Others, like the ethologists at Hungary's Family Dog Project, led for years by Adam Miklasy, argue the evidence increasingly points towards something functionally very close to empathy, whatever we choose to call it.
What makes this debate so difficult to settle is how closely it mirrors our own developmental biology. Human infants form attachment through the same oxytocin-mediated eye contact loop, long before they possess language or full cognitive understanding of another person's emotions. If a 6-month-old child bonding with a parent through gaze and hormone release counts as an emotional connection, on what basis do we deny the same possibility to a dog exhibiting an almost identical biochemical response? Perhaps the uncomfortable truth is that emotional understanding was never about language in the first place. Perhaps it was always built on something older, quieter, and far more universal than words. And yet, mysteries remain. We don't fully know whether dogs distinguish between different negative emotions, sadness from anger from fear, or whether they simply register a single broad category. Something is wrong.
Personally, I find it remarkable that an animal separated from us by millions of years of evolutionary divergence has developed a biological system so precisely tuned to our emotional signals. The deeper scientists look, the less this seems like coincidence, and the more it looks like something that was built, slowly, deliberately, across thousands of generations. Which brings us back to where we started. That moment before the tears fall. That subtle shift in posture your dog seems to notice before you're even aware of it yourself. Maybe it isn't mystical. Maybe it's oxytocin and cortisol and 15,000 years of selective pressure favoring the dogs who paid the closest attention to us. But maybe understanding the mechanism doesn't make the experience any less extraordinary. If anything, it makes it more so. Because somewhere in your dog's brain, in a nose 10,000 times more sensitive than yours, in a nervous system built to synchronize with your own, there is a version of you that your dog carries constantly, one built from scent, sound, posture, and gaze. And that raises a far stranger question we haven't answered yet. If dogs can sense when we're sad, can they sense when we're lying?